Rise of Shadows has been revealed, and I've got 8 new cards to review, including 3 crazy new legendaries.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
That's right, the new expansion is finally here, and we got some cool cards to talk about. If you don't have a ton of time to listen to me ramble about these cards forever, you can hit the quick reviews link in the description below. That'll take you straight to my 5-star ratings. Otherwise, let's talk about all of these in great detail. Up first here, I have Archvillain Rafaam himself. A new legendary minion for Warlock, 7 mana, 7/8 with taunt, and a battle cry that reads, replace your hand and deck with legendary minions. That is absolutely bonkers. And beyond that, I think it might actually be halfway decent too. I think this is a good card because first off, it's just a 7 mana, 7/8 taunt. Like, as we've seen with cards like Lich King in the past, sometimes just attaching a taunt to a big body is good. And 7/8 stat line for 7 mana is good. Now, the battle cry here, I think, is questionably less good. Your instant reaction might be, that's insane, so many legendaries. And that is a good reaction. That's a healthy, normal reaction. But do keep in mind, not all legendary minions are good or useful. There's quite a few bad ones in the pool. There's some low-cost ones in the pool. And often decks that you build have a curated set of cards that help you achieve a certain game plan. So not every deck is going to want to replace their stuff with random legendary stuff. But nonetheless, I think there is still some strategic value here. If you get a hand that's just stuck with a bunch of low-cost cards that aren't impactful in the late game, suddenly something like Archvillain Rafaam can come along and he can turn your Mortal Coil into a Tyrian Forge Ring, right? And that might be a good trade. And frankly, it might even be a good trade in an aggro deck, not just a control deck, although I think it could work in both. That 7 mana slot is one of those things that can be like the very last card in an aggro deck. So maybe you turn your 1-drop Flame Imps and Voidwalkers into big, awesome legendaries. I think that exists as a playable path for this card. I also think control decks could do the same thing. Maybe taking some of those weak removal or card draw cards that aren't useful in the late game and turning them into a more valuable resource. So to me, I really do think Archvillain Rafaam looks playable. I think it's first and foremost sort of a star marquee card, something to get your attention, and it does that very well because it's ridiculously cool. But I think it's going to be a card we actually see in competitive Hearthstone too. So for me, they knocked it out of the park here. The only thing I changed was making this card neutral, maybe to be too powerful in some way or another, but in every other regard, I absolutely love Archvillain Rafaam. So now let's move on to another perfectly designed card and one I'm so freaking happy to see in the expansion. This is Chef Nomi. And if you don't know Chef Nomi because you didn't play World of Warcraft, this is a real Warcraft character. He lives in Dalaran, which is obviously going to be a centerpiece for Rise of Shadows. And he cooks your food, or he trains you with recipes, I guess. But he always ends up burning the food. And you can see here, even in his artwork, he's got a bunch of charred, burned steaks, it looks like. So in this case with Chef Nomi, when you play the 7 mana 6/6 neutral legendary, if your deck is empty, you summon 6/6 Grease Fire Elementals. So you get 6/6s, which is scary and evil and a little demonic for Chef Nomi, I'm afraid. But nonetheless, kind of reminiscent of the fact that maybe that's why his kitchen is so insane. He's got all these Grease Fire Elementals running around, and that's why all the food is burning. But it's a cool play because you get a full board of 6/6s for only 7 mana. Now, it does certainly come with a pretty big condition in that you have to empty your deck. But I think there are already a lot of examples of decks and cards that do that very well. For instance, think about Myra's Unstable Element. As soon as you drew a Myra's and a Nomi, you could play your Myra's. You could drop a Nomi to get this absolutely bonkers board on turn 7 of all things too. And then Rogue can even refill their deck if they need to. You may not need to, because maybe this wins you the game. We've seen that in the past with cards like Dragon Caller Alana, where if you build a big board of stuff, sometimes opponents just don't have answers. Nomi could help you achieve the same thing. Now, of course, not every deck is going to have the opportunity, or excuse me, not every class or deck is going to have the opportunity to empty their deck and play a card like Chef Nomi. For instance, if you're emptying your deck, Mechathune might just be a better win condition than Nomi. But I do think those decks will exist, whether it's Rogue or somebody else or some other mechanic we haven't even seen yet. This card does something so big and so significant that I think it's still there. Maybe even just a control deck that wants to play to fatigue in the first place could still use this as that late game bomb, a big swing that helps them just push the opponent over for lethal. So to me, I see some opportunity with this card in a couple different directions. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a star card or something you see in every single deck or all over the meta, but I imagine it'll find a home in a deck or two and be an impactful card. Even if it doesn't, I love that the Hearthstone team went to such a great reference in Warcraft lore / Warcraft gaming with World of Warcraft, because I absolutely love Chef Nomi. Moving on here, we have another insanely cool legendary minion. This is Calicos. If you don't know him, he's pretty much the main dude of the blue dragonflight these days instead of Malygos. He hangs out in Dalaran a lot, so very fitting for this expansion. Calicos is the new mage legendary minion, or at least one of them. There could be two. It's a 10 mana 4/12 dragon. It reads, your first spell each turn costs 0 mana, but also battle cry, discover a spell. So you have two effects here, essentially. This long-term effect where your first spell every turn is costing you 0, but also this instant effect, the battle cry. And in combination, if you play Calicos and then you discover, say, a Pyroblast, you might get to play that Pyroblast immediately for 0 mana. So in some cases, it's going to be like a really big board swing where you discover like a Blizzard or a Flame Strike, and you clear your opponent's board and you summon a 4/12, and occasionally that 4/12 is going to have a lot of long-term value where it reduces the cost of your future spells and maybe allows you to infuse a lot of tempo onto the board in just a few short turns. That's the dream situation for Calicos. Now, of course, some downsides do exist here. You won't always discover spells that you care about. There's a lot of weak stuff in Mage. The discounts may not be that significant. It might just get removed and you don't get the long-term payoff. That means you're committing 10 mana to a kind of middling play that doesn't feel quite as good. It's never guaranteed to do something absolutely ridiculous. But, you know, for one turn, it's often going to be better than like a Ysera. Ysera just gives you a random card. This gives you a card that you'd get to choose, and you get to play it immediately. So I do think certain kinds of mage decks that play a much slower, more control-oriented style could utilize Kalecgos well. There could maybe be some combo opportunities with a card like this, but I think it's going to be harder because you might have to really significantly decrease the cost of it or keep it alive for multiple turns. I don't think that's going to be easy to achieve. So I don't see the sky as the limit for this card as a just ridiculous auto-include in control decks necessarily, but it has some merits. I think it could see a little bit of play here and there. It feels somewhere in the middle to me, so probably will end up being something like a 3-star card. But who knows, maybe some craziness will exist out there, and a card like this will make a lot more sense. I think of it sometimes as just like a Firelance Portal or a Blaze Caller, or like even like an Arcane Tyrant, kind of where you play a minion and you play a spell at the same turn and it gives you a swing opportunity. Clearly it's bigger because it's a 4/12 than most of the minions I cited there. But at the end of the day, those aren't like game-winning plays, and I don't really think Calicos is going to create those sorts of scenarios. So we'll see if it sticks on board occasionally. Yeah, absolutely, it'll be a home run. So the opportunity's out there. This card has some potential. So up next here, let's talk about the Evil Miscreant, a new 3-mana minion for Rogue. It comes in at 1/5. Its combo reads, add 2 random lackeys to your hand. Now, lackeys are kind of like the new spare parts for this expansion, but they're going to be minions instead of spells. You can see all 5 here. They're each 1 mana, 1/1 minions that have something to do on the battle cry. One discovers a spell, one summons a random 2-cost minion, one gives a friendly minion +1 attack and rush, one has an evolve effect that transforms a friendly minion into a minion that costs 1 more, and finally another one does 2 damage on the battle cry. So frankly, all of these lackeys are actually really good cards for 1 mana. And if you stack up enough of them and you get some cool effects out of them, they could pay off pretty well, particularly in a deck that might have some battle cry synergies, and Rogue certainly has ways to utilize battle cries and combos with things like the Spirit of the Shark in the past. So a card like Evil Miscreant that could add a lot of lackeys to your hand. You could use these really cheap cards to either, you know, express their battle cries in a positive way with a synergy, or even just empower things like Edwin, because Rogue usually likes playing a lot of cards, and having cheap cards added to your hand is typically good. A card like this to me makes a ton of sense in Rogue. I could see a lot of different ways this thing gets played. Now, a 1/5 stat line is clearly not ideal for Rogue, and the fact that you have to combo this means it's not usually going to be a good like turn 3 tempo play, which is really where Rogue survives and thrives today, is those really ridiculous turn 3s. So it will shift the power curve of Rogue more towards that turn 4, turns 5 perhaps, and then you got to have mana to play these lackeys as well. So it is a little bit more delayed. That gives me a little pause and a little concern for a card like this, that maybe it won't be fast enough to put its influence into play. That's something to keep an eye on. But nonetheless, I think because these lackeys seem to line up so well with what Rogue wants to do. They would probably work better in Rogue than many other classes. And I should note, if you haven't heard, these lackeys will be available in multiple cards in multiple classes. They're not just limited to this specific card. So maybe there's a lackey deck with other cards that you just build out some crazy opportunities. But I think there's potential there. It's just slower and a little bit harder to manifest than what Rogue has done historically. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But beyond that, I think Evil Miscreant has some potential, certainly, to see play if those synergies exist. Up next here, I have Hagatha's Scheme, a new 5-mana shaman spell. It reads deal 1 damage to all minions, and it upgrades each turn. And schemes are a new kind of card that will each have this upgrades each turn mechanic, where the primary number of the card, in this case 1 damage, will improve every single turn. Now, it's not every single turn like Gruul, it's every turn that you have. So it's 1 damage on your first turn you see it. The next time you have an opportunity to play it, it'll go to 2. The next turn you have an opportunity to play it, it'll go to 3. It's not basically gaining 2 during your... It's not gaining during your opponent's turn, only during your turn. I know the wording's a little confusing there, but I saw the card in action. I can guarantee you that's how it works. With that in mind, what this means is that Hagatha's Scheme is pretty bad as a base card. Top decking it will feel terrible a majority of the time. 5 mana to deal 1 is awful. That's a whirlwind effect. That's 1 mana most of the time. And it doesn't really start to feel good until it probably gets to that 3 or 4 or sometimes even 5 damage range where it really clears a lot of different stuff. So you're going to have it sitting in your hand for 4 or 5 turns for it to feel good. And sometimes I think that's going to be okay because, you know, how many times have you had like a volcano sitting in your hand where you didn't feel pressured to play it? Other times I'm going to be like, God, that just killed my draw. I top decked a card that is totally useless, and you're just going to waste a draw sometimes, and that feels really bad. So I think schemes will probably be best in the case where it's like, oh, I can keep that in the mulligan, and that'll be fine. And maybe Hagatha Scheme, you can do that. Maybe you can keep a 5-drop in the mulligan. But I still think some decks and some scenarios are really going to struggle with a card like this, where they just don't want to have it camped in their hand for that long. They want to be able to play cards sooner and faster. They don't want to be stuck with dead options. They don't want to be stuck with dead top decks. So I do think in Hagatha's case here, specifically with this scheme, I think it's going to struggle more than it's going to succeed. But nonetheless, you know, a deal 10 damage to all minions for 5 mana could be a pretty ridiculous removal spell. So I still do hold out a little bit of hope that if the right deck comes along, it could find a way to actually utilize this card successfully. So I haven't given up on it completely. I just do think the awkwardness, the challenge of getting it all to line up correctly is probably going to make it worse rather than better most of the time. So moving on, let's talk about the Forest's Aid, a new druid spell for 8 mana. It's a twin spell, and what twin spell means is whenever you play this spell, another copy exists in your hand, but the second copy doesn't have twin spell. So you basically get an echo of the card, but it's a permanent echo. It doesn't go away at the end of the turn. You just get 2 versions of it bundled into a single card and a single draw, which can be significant, right? Because now every time you draw a twin spell, you're really drawing 2 cards instead of 1. So it kind of doubles the power level or impact of that single card. It also means you can kind of build your deck in an interestingly different way, because if you need, say, 10 Treants with a card like this that summons you 5/2/2 Treants, you only need to really run 1 copy of the Forest's Aid, because you'll end up with 2 copies of the Forest's Aid because of Twin Spell. So essentially you might be able to run more ramp or more removal or whatever else you're looking for to help assemble a deck, so that you don't have to commit so hard into a synergy like this one for Treants. It only takes up that 1 slot in your deck, so you have 29 other cards to work with. So just to reiterate, you play the Forest's Aid, it stays in your hand, you played 1 copy of it, there's a leftover copy that no longer has Twin Spell, it doesn't go forever, it just goes that 1 time, but it's a 2-for-1. And I should note it also stays in the same position in your hand, which can have some important impact in certain cases where you care about where things are at in your hand. So all that said, is the Forest's Aid here actually a good card? Well, 2 Treants at turn 8, I think, are pretty weak. They're just not going to do a lot. We saw previously in Hearthstone's meta with Living Mana, where you've got 5 2/2 Treants on turn 5. That felt pretty good, right? Because you would essentially have a really big board on turn 5. That could be hard to deal with. Druid had a lot of good ways to follow up on that. At turn 8, I think that's less compelling. Now, perhaps, of course, there is some Treant synergy build out there We've had cards like Mulch Muncher that make that look promising in some ways, Dendrologist, etc. But I still think by turn 8, it's going to be a real pain. And it's like, do you run ramp to get it there so this feels better? Even then, it's like, is a token deck really a ramp deck in a lot of ways? It can be, but it still probably doesn't feel great. So I have concerns about a card like this, that it's just going to come too slow. But, you know, if you have 4 of these total in your deck because you got 2 Twin Spell cards, it's like, every turn I'm just summoning more 2/2 Treants. Is eventually one going to stick? I don't know. I think if this was 6 mana so you could combo it with like Soul of the Forest on the same turn, that would really help. But at 8 mana, the combo opportunities don't really exist there either to play something alongside it. So to me, I think this card just looks too slow. The synergies are going to be too hard to figure out, so I don't really think this card's going to be all that strong. Moving on here, I have Forbidden Words, a 0 mana priest spell that reads, spend all your mana, destroy a minion with that much attack or less. And this is what Hearthstone's calling a callback card, because it's a callback, a reference to the forbidden cards from Whispers of the Old Gods. You guys might remember a few of those. There were a bunch. This case, you spend all your mana, much like with those other forbidden cards, but it has a unique new effect that you get to destroy a minion. That means if you want to kill a Lich King, for instance, and I guess that's going to be an example that's stuck in my brain until we get a new universally good card, Archvillain Rafaam. If you want to kill an Archvillain Rafaam with Forbidden Words, you'll need to spend 7 mana to do that, because he's a 7 mana 7/8. So you get, kind of a big single target removal card, but it's a flexible card, which is nice. So if you really have to kill a 2-attack minion for some reason, Forbidden Words can do that really efficiently. Think of that like Moshog Enforcer. 2 mana to kill an 8-drop is insanely good. And I like that aspect of this card, is that it's that removal in a pinch. It also fills that gap at 4-attack that Priest sometimes has problems with. So if you don't want to commit to Shadow Word Pain or Shadow Word Death because you're looking for a little bit of flexibility, Forbidden Words could offer that opportunity. And a lot of times Priest has spare mana to work with too. I've seen so many turns where Priest like Shadow Word Deaths, and then they have like 5 mana left with nothing to do. They just maybe hero power face. Well, in this case, you could use Forbidden Words for 5 mana on a 5-attack minion, Shadow Word Death it, and you didn't really lose anything, right? Because you had spare mana anyway. And that flexibility, I think, offers a lot. And the downside of losing some mana here and there probably isn't that significant. Now, one problem with a card like this, it can't kill everything like Shadow Word Death. You get a 12-attack minion like Deathwing on board. Forbidden Words is totally stranded. Shadow Word Death doesn't care. So that is something to keep in mind, something that could keep this card in check. So it will certainly be a meta-dependent card that gets good against certain metas and bad against others. But it just, if that flexibility and that perfect range exists for a card like this, I think it absolutely has the potential to be played. I think it could be a cool little utility removal spell in Priest's arsenal. And then finally here, one last card, a neutral minion called the Spellwar Jeweler. A new 3 mana 3/4 with a battle cry that reads, your hero can't be targeted by spells or hero powers until your next turn. So this is kind of designed to be an OTK counter card in a way, in that vein of like Lotheb, where you're denying your opponent their opportunity to do whatever thing it is they want it to do. So, if it's a mage looking to go off with an OTK fireball combo, even though that'll be rotating out of standard, they can't target you at all, so they just have to wait a turn, and maybe that's the turn you find just enough pressure to kill them, right? If it's a Malygos-driven deck, like a Malygos Druid that's going to hit you for a bunch of Moonfires, drop a Spellwar Jeweler, and they got to wait a turn to do that. So I think this was printed specifically to ease some of those OTK concerns we've had in Hearthstone over the last few metas. To be honest, I don't really think Spellwar Jeweler's all that good at that. Not a lot of decks are going to want to run just kind of a vanilla 3 mana 3/4 for that occasional OTK counter. But it is important for cards like this to exist just to keep OTK in check. If we ever got into that space where there were bajillions of OTK decks, Spellwar Jeweler could help stop them. Now, unfortunately, a card like this doesn't do anything against like Mechathune OTKs, those universal win condition OTKs. This would only serve one specific style of tech or counter. Still important to exist, but a card I think we probably won't end up seeing all that much of. Often you'd just be better off running a good 3-drop that helps you execute your game plan and kill your opponent faster, as opposed to a card like this. But occasionally a control deck that doesn't have any other way to stop an OTK deck, sure, maybe something like Spellwar Jeweler could do the job. I don't think it's good enough because it's only going to stall for 1 turn. It doesn't deny them the combo altogether with something like Dirty Rat might have done. But I think Blizzard tease we're going to see more of these disruption style cards. This won't be the only one. So it's good that it exists, but at the end of the day, I don't think a card we're going to see a ton of will probably just end up being kind of a mediocre, forgotten tech card. Wow, that was a lot of cards to talk through. It's a lot of opinions to process. Some pretty crazy stuff, though. Some exciting cards I think will be great. Some cards I think will be average that have some opportunity, and maybe it will take a while to see any substantial play. Other cards that probably just aren't going to be all that good altogether. But a good mixed bag is exactly what you're looking for when you do a Hearthstone card review. Not everything can be great, and not everything should be great. All that said, now that the detailed reviews are done, let's go ahead and jump into the quick reviews. Archvillain Rafaam is a 4-star card. Chef Nomi is a 3-star card. Kalecgos is a 3-star card. Evil Miscreant is a 3-star card. Hagis Scheme is a 2-star card. The Forest Aid is a 2-star card. Forbidden Words is a 3-star card. And Spellwar Jeweler is a 2-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for Rise of Shadows card review number 1. Curious what you guys think about these cards, these keywords, all that stuff. I'm always excited to hear your interpretation, see how close we all line up on what we think these cards are going to do. Don't forget, I've played most of them, but I haven't played them in competitive Hearthstone, so who knows what they're going to do. That said, leave your comments below with all those thoughts and insights, and thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.